Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this really exciting conversation. Welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 695th New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC for a conversation featuring Immaculata Abba, Ọlákìítán Adéolá, Yemisi Aribisala, Yinka Elujoba, Kemi Falodun, Sebo-Kapade, Joseph Nduku, and Emmanuel Iduma, who are some of the contributors to the November Critics page in the Brooklyn Rail. We are also thrilled to welcome poet Megan Sungyoon here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter, and here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and the Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for actual and necessary decolonial work, but they serve as a reminder of place and of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we are speaking from. And now to introduce today's guests and host. Researcher, writer, and visual artist Immaculata Abba has written and photographed for multiple international publications and is currently a research fellow with the Shared Heritage Africa project between DOCOMOMO International and Architectuul. Ọlákìítán Adéolá is a trans themme poet, experiential artist, and curator working in spirals and reversals. Nigerian-born writer and painter Yemisi Aribisala is currently based in London. Her writing explores various topics, including feminism, Nigerian Christianity, and identity, and her essays on food are a lens through which the complex entity of Nigeria can be observed. Yinka Elujoba is a Nigerian writer and critic living in New York. He is working on a novel about a boy and his mother in response to Arshile Gorky's The Artist and His Mother, and is writing art criticism for the New York Times. Kemi Falodun is a Nigerian writer, journalist, and editor exploring mental health, intergenerational complexities, social justice, and culture, especially photography and film. She's currently an MFA student in fiction at the Helen Zell Writers Program at the University of Michigan. Writer, curator, and journalist Sebo-Kapade specializes in the arts and cultures of Africa and its diaspora in the UK, US, and Europe. Currently, Sebo writes for Contemporary and Apple Music. Joseph Nduku is a writer and editor who lives in Lagos, Nigeria. His work has been published in Guernica, The Prairie Schooner, and elsewhere. In 2021, he was selected for the Momus Emerging Critics Residency, and in 2022, he won the Virginia Faulkner Award. And finally, our host today, Emmanuel Iduma, is the author of 2 works of nonfiction, including a travel log, A Stranger's Pose, and I Am Still With You, a memoir forthcoming in 2023 in February. He is based between Lagos, Nigeria, and Norwich, UK. We are so grateful to have you all here today. And I'm excited to pass it over to Emmanuel to get us started. And thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? I think I should be clear. Yeah, thank you. So when Charlie invited me to guest edit this month's critics page, it was soon clear to me that my mission was twofold. In a broad sense, I wanted to introduce readers of the Rail to the best of Nigerian criticism, to 10 writers whose fine nonfiction work in relation to images I have enjoyed. But in a particular sense, and more importantly, I wanted to see what range and moral stamina is possible when photographs are dealt with as emissaries of narrative. So for the section, I asked the writers to choose a photograph and write a narrative based on it. How they define narrative was completely up to them. They could borrow from any genre, including biography, history, memoir, and the news, I wanted to bring to the fore the idea that a critic, in the best sense, is also a storyteller. Needless to say, I am very glad and very honored with the results of that experiment. Although to describe it as an experiment is to accept that there was in the first place the possibility of failure, which is not exactly how I framed it for myself. For I was convinced that the prompt allowed such room for imagination as to be almost fail-proof. I'm hoping today's conversation would ideally serve to introduce you to the writers themselves, in addition to their writing. I hope you've had the time. If you haven't, please read the section. It won't take much of your time. The narratives are quite short, which means that each piece displays the core of its heart without circumlocution or dross. Our conversation would proceed in two parts, based on a loose categorization of the photographs that we are written about. The first group of 4 contributors selected photographs from personal collections, either photographs they took themselves or those taken by photographers they admire. And the second group of 3 selected photographs from historical sources. And if I were to propose a theoretical framework for how we might listen to this incredible group of 7 writers, I would ask that we consider photographic criticism as a triangulation of the past, of considerations of the past, the imagination, and the moment of looking. And now, without further ado, I want to introduce you to Kemi Falodun, Sabukpade, Ọlákìítán Adéolá, and Joseph Omo Nduku, who selected photographs from personal sources and would now in turn speak about how they responded to the prompt. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, Brooklyn Rail. It's such a privilege to be included or to be invited to contribute my work to this issue. So I'm so happy to have written and to be here today. So my work, I wrote, Who Shall I Say Is Calling? So some context to that. A few years ago, in 2017, really, I was in this group. I was part of this group of artists, photographers, writers, and filmmakers. I mean, I was there as a writer. And it was organized by the Invisible Borders Trans-African Organization. And we took a road trip across Nigeria. So the main purpose really was to understand borders, how borders affect people, you know, the impact of borders, cultural, social, political impact of borders in general. And also I remember one of the most prominent questions we're trying to ask, that we're asking ourselves and that we're asking, even as we're moving through spaces and as we're meeting people, was what does it mean to be Nigerian? So we wanted to know that, to understand that. And so in talking to people, in meeting people, we're asking ourselves, what does it mean to be Nigerian? And of course, in Nigeria, one of the identifiers really, apart from ethnicity and gender and class, of course, which cuts across everything, is another factor, another identifier really is religion. So we went to this hill, it's called Sobi Hill in Ilorin. So we wanted to, because people go to elevated places sometimes to pray, to worship, and for retreat and for religious purposes and all of that. So of course we knew we were going to meet people there, and then we went there, and then I met this boy, and he was talking about being a prophet that he has known for a long time, that it has been prophesied that he was going to spend his life working for God, and I was a prophet and all of that. And I thought that was really fascinating in that moment. One of my co-travelers then, he was about to take a picture he was about to photograph him, and I was also able to photograph both of them in that moment. And so over the years, I've found myself thinking about that image a lot. What does it mean what does prophecy really even mean? Because when he was talking, it reminded me of my younger self, growing up in a religious household as well, as just like so many people. And so I wanted to, for some reason, I've carried that image with me for a long, long time. about how people navigate religion and religious spaces. And so when I got the prompt to just write about anything, in fact, this photograph didn't come to mind immediately. I was still thinking of what to write about. And then it came to mind and I decided to write about it. Like, oh, why not? Maybe to be, so all along all these years, it has been me thinking about this image has been me trying to have a conversation with myself about what that image meant to me when it was taken or when I took it, and as the boy was talking in that moment. But when I got the prompt, I thought it would be an opportunity to also have a conversation with people, with the boy, because I wrote it in form of a letter. Even though I don't know where he is right now. I don't know if he will ever read it. But it was an attempt to have a conversation with him and with my readers as well. What does it mean to, how do people come into their convictions? So that's really what I was thinking when I was writing the essay. When I started it, I didn't know where I was going with it. And then I started to think about stories in general, how people come into their belief systems, how beliefs are made, and the impact of stories, how stories are passed down from generations to generations, and how people hold on to some beliefs. So what impact do they have? What impact do those beliefs have? And how do people move through the world with those beliefs, and just the impact of stories in general? So I was thinking about my childhood, I was thinking about that encounter, and I was thinking about the impact of stories in general and the things people hold on to. When do you know how do you know when to let go of some beliefs? Or how do you know that some beliefs are probably not worth holding on to, or maybe they are worth holding on to after all, or whatever it is. So I was just thinking about the impact of words and stories in general, and how we construct, how words sort of serve as an avenue or as a means to construct our words, stories. You can construct a word for yourself, or you can construct words for yourself by stories, really. So that's what I was trying to understand, even as I was writing the essay. So that's yeah. That's the idea behind the writing. So yeah.
We'll go to Sabo and then Keaton and Joseph. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Hello. My story is titled Tall House. And I struggled to find a photo to respond to because I thought I had so many choices to choose from. But I always wanted to write about my time in London, having left after 15 years, and maybe moving back to Nigeria and going to school in Rhode Island and coming back to Nigeria. So I am very much a failed novelist in the sense that I haven't published anything I've written. So I figured, I'll use this opportunity. And that's something I've been trying to do in my own writing, which is to ultimately simplify. It's not a boring example when I suggest that things fall apart. You read it today. The simplicity of the writing, it still blows my mind. So it's a personal project. So a few things came together here. One was to mine my own personal experiences of having lived and worked in London, but then towards the end of it was frustrated that this place is not where I'm going to blossom. I best leave quickly. And then the new adventure of going to the US, touristy, and also to find the right vehicle, the right story with which to practice this simplified type of writing, because I think what I was doing before was different. Like any other upstart writer, you want to write like everybody else. At one point, I was writing like Bernard Creed. So I figured this is a good opportunity, especially when it's just 700 words and it will be published. So that also has its validity. So if I do this successfully, yes, it will tell maybe this is the path forward or for what I want to do next. The picture I chose was taken by a good friend of mine and photographer, Dan Mary, Gabonese French photographer. And this picture is actually a house in France. It's not in London, but I lived in a similar house in London. So, and it felt apt to me. So he takes many photographs like this of houses, of estate houses. They call estate or council estates in England, probably called, I don't know, projects elsewhere, but it's for the working class specifically. So all these things came together and I decided I was going to, yes, mine my personal experience. Emmanuel pointed out to me that this is auto-fiction. I was trying to pass it off as fiction. So you mind your personal experience, the veracity in that, because things are concrete, you know them, you felt them, but then change names, pass them off as fiction, but that wasn't going to work out. Someone smarter than me told me, probably not, it's auto-fiction. I'm still going to try passing off as fiction. Emmanuel, you can't stop me. So all this came together and decided to write this draft. And I'm happy I did because I was in Lagos at the time, trying to figure out stuff out, trying to figure out Lagos out. If anybody knows what that means, you know, it's not the easiest thing. But it was important to me to take the time out to write this. And I'm very glad I did. So yes, it is mine from personal experience. And the aim ultimately is to achieve a very effective or simplified but effective type of writing. Thank you.
Just before you, can you speak to any other contributors working the issue?
Yes. Where is it now? And I love everybody's work. Guys, I love everybody here. Yemisi Aribisala's photo and story and dismissal in the last paragraph, really, I liked it. I liked seeing this idea of Nigeria, this vision of Nigeria. This period of Nigeria I never lived, I never experienced. Like this, the days of the safari suit. My dad had a safari suit, which he wore out in evenings to go drinking. It was a thing to have a safari suit. You don't wear that every day. The headscarf and the specific way the women have tied their headscarves. It's I think it's also called Ali Gogoro. It's a particular fashion. So that these things, the recollection going down this memory, specific memory lane, and the sad loss of Bola Ige, who at the time of his death was our Minister for Power and Steel. So a lot of Nigeria that has gone, that's passed, that may not be recognizable to Nigerians today, is in this. So it's strongly nostalgic for me, but nostalgia for a period one did not experience. So it's interesting. So I think that made it very effective. So I liked it, but I could go on about every
Thank you. Yeah. So I think Kit Cohen's next.
Hi everyone. Thanks again, Emmanuel. I've said this a number of times, but thank you so much for all you do and also the opportunity to be able to contribute my writing. So I wrote the piece called Beauty Begrudged Refuses to Pose. And this lyric essay began initially as a poem where I was thinking about a begrudged subject that was inspired by a James Baldwin character. And so with the poem, I was thinking about the possibility of a beauty that has decided to take itself out of the equation of relation and also question the need for whatever redemption. Is there a need for redemption? So when Emmanuel reached out for a narrative based on a photo, I knew that I wanted to write something that wasn't looking back into an historical archive, So I thought and thought around for days about what photo I wanted to write around. I also looked around too, until I found this photograph that we can see on screen now. So when I saw the photograph, the germ of the poem that I was thinking about initially, and this particular scene in the photograph sort of converged and something sparked. And then the end forged the beginning, and I responded from there. So with Beauty Begrudged Refuses to Pose, I was stretching out and thinking through ideas about the relation of gazes, the relation between gazes, the agency of one's fantasy, and how much an image is not made alone by the camera. These are things that I have been also thinking about earlier in a curatorial proposition, this idea of the gazes and the relation of gazes and what comes outside of that relation. So this consideration or meditation on gazes, I find resonance with Ifeoluwa Nihilola's piece titled Like a Mask Dancing. So in Ife's writing, there is an inverse happening here, and it really gets to situating a gaze, which is not normally seen as the gaze within the narrating voice. And so what is happening is, and it's something that I kind of wish I did, that I admired, like, and I wish I did in my writing, where you have a particular gaze being the narrator of the voice, as opposed to like a third person talking about the relation between gazes. And as I said earlier on, it does it in a way that I wish I did. And there is also something about the gazes description that rings very lovely to read. Like in this sentence, it says, she is the woman who talks like she is having conversations with your chi. But there is a delight in knowing your soul needs no translator, that someone you desire can hear your body in all its dialects. So for the sake of time, I can't draw out all the things that I would love to from these sentences alone. But as a whole, I think in Ifeoluwa's writing, there is a thing that the piece is doing where, yes, one subtext of the piece can be read as reverting anthropological imposition, where the one who decides to tell the story supposedly holds all the power, but that gaze or the one who is telling the story seems to forget that there is no real power after all, and that power is an invented security, and that every encounter always exists in relation, is always in an horizontal and non-hierarchical manner. And what power does really is power only really seeks to disturb that flow of horizontal and non-hierarchical relation. And to end by returning back to my piece, I liked that the end wasn't really about a reclamation or reclaiming of power, but a character allowing a multiple flow or relation to create the image. And so at the end, the last paragraph in my piece, I talked about how beauty does not at the end like engage to like pose again, but it does that in a different way, where everything that is happening in the scene, in the photograph, merges together to create the beauty, as opposed to a gaze alone or the subject alone or one's fantasy alone. Yeah, so that is my piece. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiton. We'll just go in the final for the last person in this first group, to Joseph Nduku.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And thank you all who have spoken before me. Sorry, sometimes when one is asked to speak about a photograph or an image, the things that one can say, through a photograph are about inexhaustible. So anyways, for my piece, it was a photograph by a photographer whose work I really enjoy for the sheer beauty of them. Lidudu Malinga Nkomboti. He's a South African photographer and filmmaker, and he writes too. He's a writer too. So, but this photograph was particularly appealing to me because I liked the colors. I liked the green of the tree, and I liked the red of the brick, and I liked sunlight falling over everything. So that was what particularly attracted me. But I found that somehow, after I'd seen that photograph, on some level, it was present in my consciousness, you know. Something about it was interleaved with the days, you know, ever since I saw it. And I couldn't quite hash out what that was and why it was persistent. And so when I was asked to write about, you know, a photograph, a narrative around a photograph, I was like, wow, that's nice. I could tell a story, you know, thinking through a photograph. But I didn't know what photograph, you know. I wanted to do something more historiographic. I wanted to do something with people in it. So there were a lot of choices, you know. But I just thought the photograph that had been calling to me was just there sitting, and said, okay, I'll look at you and then I'll say what I think you want me to say. And that's how the writing came about. So when I was writing, I was thinking about what kind of photographs say to a life, what kind of photograph say about a life, what kind of photograph illuminate about a life, and living generally, one's aspirations, one's despair, one's solidity of faith. Because in the writing, I kind of interweave these two very kind of closely and loosely at the same time. Solidity, faith, rootedness, a kind of, you know. And so the photograph had, the texture of the photograph had all of that in it, the solid wall, and then also the fact of light and the path and the door. So all of this gave an opportunity for me to talk about how through a photograph one can look at one's life again and see what that living means and what one has thought about his life up to that point, and try to express that as succinctly as possible. So yes, that was basically, I think, the thought around the writing and the images as clearly as I can express it now. And then Immaculata's work, I liked it a lot. I liked the Igbo name, Ahamefuna. My name will not be lost. It was very profound when I read that. And so I was thinking about how she was able to draw through a photograph. It's quite remarkable, you know, this lineage from pre-colonial times, several generations ago, up to herself, and kind of through a photograph form a kind of kinship, and then try to know her great-grandfather, people up, in fact, 4 years older than her great-grandfather. And there was also the humility, which I deeply appreciated, that it was impossible to approach that kind of knowing. But she was content with just asking that question, trying to know, trying to reach for this kinship, which is deeply felt, but very elusive. And, you know, just bringing it down to the core of our existence. Whom do we love? What is the point of love? You know, so I found that very, very arresting, actually. So, yeah, so that's it.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Just to get Kemi to speak about any writer any other contributors' work in the issue that she resonated with.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Emmanuel. I actually thought it was going to be another round for that. Yeah, I wanted to talk about Immaculata's work as well. I thought this was really, apart from the photograph, the person looking away and all of that, I thought it was interesting how she was able to project her personal, like the writer Immaculata, a personal story, relationship with her grandfather onto this image, this public image, this public history. But another thing that I find really interesting is, you know, the part where she says she's not able to have to converse with her grandfather in Igbo because she doesn't speak Igbo. She can only pray in Igbo, and it made me think about the scripture about the person that speaks in tongues doesn't speak to man, but to God, because I'll be in the spirit. I'll be they speak mysteries, something like that. Sorry, I'm struggling. Anyway, I thought about that scripture and the fact that just that gap, the part about communication, like struggling with communication and not being able to, but like this, I think that's the way, that's the place stories come in. The fact that you may not be able to articulate some things you're trying to say, but yeah, the relationship just says a lot about it. And I thought that was really interesting, the place of prayer in articulating what you want to say, even when you don't have the words. Yeah, so thank you, Immaculata.
Thank you. So thank you very much, everyone. We're going to go to the next group of contributors, beginning with Yemisi Aribisala, Immaculata Abba, and Yinka Elujoba. We don't have Joshua Segun-Lean, who was supposed to be with us, but had a last minute emergency, so to speak. And the images by these three contributors come from the archives of the ICRC, in Yinka's case, the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology in the UK, in the case of Immaculata and Joshua. And in Yemisi Aribisala's case, a photograph from her family archive, graced Sabo mentioned by the presence of two of Nigeria's most storied men. So Yemisi would begin and then would go to Immaculata and end with Yinka. Thank you.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Thank you, Brooklyn Rail, for the opportunity. I might do mine slightly differently because there's a line from Joseph's piece that just captures why I chose this photograph. And it's the first line because it says, "I was growing weary in the small house." And funnily enough, I chose my photograph because of weariness. I'd explained to Emmanuel that I had a problem with images, with moving images. I have a problem with moving images and with the necessity of engaging with them, engaging on social media, engaging in real life with things moving very quickly, and just getting very tired and having to deal with, and having that grown-up responsibility of dealing with continually moving images, and finding that I'm only at peace when I look at things that are still. And so I chose this image because the people were seated and standing, but it was peaceful, and there was no, they're not making any points. They're not protesting. They're just at a dinner party, and they've been called away to sit and take a photograph. And so they're not thinking about anything other than looking their best. It is an official event, but it's just people who in that particular place and time did not think that Nigeria would become as it is now. They were very sure of themselves and sure of their intelligence, their power. They didn't think that people would write history books about them and talk about how some people are more sophisticated than them, more civilized than them. It was just, there was just that confidence in who they were. And these are people that achieved so much on par with anyone anywhere in the world, and their world is somehow encapsulated in this photograph, where it isn't small at all, because there's a gentleman standing in the back who became president of Nigeria twice or three times. How many times did he go? And so there's so much power in this photograph, but there is so little what we do on social media, where we have to keep presenting ourselves and presenting our power and our competence. It's just these people who represent a kind of idea of Nigeria, not Nigeria as a whole, but do it in a very sophisticated, very, in a way that you could not argue with. Even now, that sophistication comes across to you, and not because they're related to me in any way. I don't know the people in the photograph. Now, to go back to Dudu Malingani's photo, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name properly, but what, again, if I put my weariness in this photo and I'm immediately just relaxed with the sunlight, as Joseph describes it, with this nook and this wall where it feels like you can hide yourself. You don't have to answer to Brexit and Ukraine, and I mean, all of these things are necessary, and we have to kind of engage with the world and engage with the images. It's the reality of where we are now, but there is something about a photograph that just helps, that is solid, like the wall in that photograph that Joseph has chosen, that is just immediately comforting for me. And perhaps it is the same with these people. They represent a kind of wall. I couldn't find out who all of them were. And as I explained to Emmanuel, I've carried this photograph for years and years and years, and I have no idea who many of the people are, but it is a photograph that represents something that I hope we can sort of gain again as a country and as people. So if that makes any sense. Thanks, Emmanuel.
Okay, I'm guessing I should just go for it. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you to everyone who has spoken, particularly those who have asked me questions. I'll go ahead to answer them now because they actually helped me talk about this. So first of all, what Kiton said about the gays in both their essay and Ifeoluwa's essay was very resonant with my own piece and my own process. Like listening to them speak was very tingling. But to answer Joseph's question about like, how did I do it, right? The issues and the relationships I wrote about in the essay are issues and relationships I have been thinking about for a very long time, years, in many ways, the whole of my life. But recently, those questions, issues, relationships, they've become very pressing. Like family is at the top of my mind these days. My grandfather died just this time last year. There was so all of that had become very important, almost urgent. And so when I was given the commission, it was easiest for me to look for a photo that would help refract this very thing that, you know, like is saturated, like my mind is saturated with. And that was how I came to choose the picture, because when I saw it, I saw the intensity of tenderness that I needed to see to talk about what it is I had to talk about. So in the actual writing, I started writing the essay right before I slept off, and then I wrote the remaining bits as soon as I woke up. Not that this is my method, but I was working a job that left me so exhausted. So like the only time I had was right before I slept and after I woke up. But that really helps because then I freed myself to let my subconscious do the things with like arranging the narrative and all of that. And I remember waking up when I slept with this essay in my mind, right? And then when I woke up, it felt like my grandfather was right there, the one that died most recently. But I really felt his presence, that spirit and memory and the feeling of him. And that was how, like feeling him right there was how I was able to write that section of the essay where I was like, I moved. Basically, I was seeing him in the person in the picture, and I was going to touch him and ask him questions about his life and who he loved. So that's one. The other thing I have to say about the photograph that I was going to say before these questions was that writing this was a process of even coming into my own experience of the story of the narrative, because it was my first time arriving at this point in this narrative about myself and about what questions matter to me now. Because previously, that narrative, I kind of stopped at that Achebe colonial, like, you know, I studied history, studied post-colonial literature. That's been my life for a number of years now because of this Achebe giving purpose. But I'm also coming out of that stage / frame in my life. And this essay helped me to write that out. And in writing it, I really came to accept that my life was changing and that my purpose was going more and more into the interior of both myself and of like people, which leads me then to Kemi Falodun's photo and essay. There was a bit in the essay, I think in the beginning, where she's asking Prophet, how did you arrive at that conviction? And in many ways, my own essay was the answer I would give if I was Prophet. And I love that she ended with this very sturdy admiration for Prophet. And her reason for this was because, as she says, it takes a certain courage to walk with God, which is something that I am also grappling with in this experience that I wrote about. But what touched me most in the photograph, and like it touches me like a screw, because like it keeps turning inside me. I'm sitting down and like I just remember it. It's her own moving towards and moving away and moving with God, or like that power in herself, in her work. This dance of her own like pursuit of, or like her walk with God. It moves, it changes. And I find that to be a very delicious aspect of what it means to be alive, what it means to be living right now. And I deeply appreciated how the photo is, I guess we'll always be able to tap on that door in her life, in her mind. Yeah, that's that from me.
I guess I'll just go as well. Thank you everyone for having us. As a personal practice, 4 years ago, I began to gather images I thought contained what I would describe as some kind of prickliness. The category for the prickliness has sort of widened over the years. So right now, I don't even remember what it was that spurred me to begin to collect them in the first place. The archive has sort of grown. It's this private, vast archive that I have of certain images. But I think that there's a couple of themes that continue to recall, like space, time, the sea, forces that might combine to constitute what you might call a story. And I think I remember the prompt came to me at a time when I'd been thinking about the things that might culminate into a story, you know, the way a photographer would think about it, a musician even, or perhaps a painter. So I was digging into my archive and I found this photograph from the Biafran War in 1968. I think the first thing that attracted me to this photograph were the two small wounds on the elbows of this boy that was squatting in the photograph. And it appeared to me that the entry point to a story had become clear. I was wondering what kind of writing would be possible if I could, you know, think in the way that the photographer was thinking, if it was possible to feel what he felt when he saw this boy that had these two wounds on his elbows. And, you know, just to look at the work of Joshua Segun-Lean, there's a moving paragraph in it that sort of embodies the character of stories. And I'll just like read that paragraph. It says, quote, "A premonition in the face of the imaginable. A woman lets out a great wail long before she receives news of her husband's death. When the body is shown to her, the messenger is told that his news is no longer news and asked if he has brought anything else," end quote. And I've been sort of thinking about that photograph because I imagine that it's sort of that idea encircles the creation of this photograph, in the sense that Max Vitalos, he had been photographing the east of Nigeria, and most of these photographs were dark, gritty images that seemed devoid of any concern or interest. I think he was simply doing the work of a camera. And the work of a camera, if you think about it in mechanical terms, is simply to record. But a story begins with a premonition. And I was wondering if he had a premonition when he got on a plane to Bioko to record, these Biafran refugees who had escaped Nigeria. I was wondering if he had a premonition when he saw the boy with the wounds on his elbows at the Santa Isabel airport. I think that's the name of the airport in Equatorial Guinea. But I think I sort of arrived at the conclusion that a premonition is the beginning of a story, even when it happens at what seems like an end. But yeah, that's what I was thinking about as far as this prompt and exercise was concerned.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all who contributed. I think it would be best, because of the amount of time we have left, to just open it up to a Q&A.
Thank you so much to all of you for that really amazing conversation, and it was just amazing to hear more about your written work. So thank you for sharing. Perhaps we can start with the question. I'm not sure if anyone in the audience has a question, feel free to raise your hand or send it in the chat. I see one question. Yeah, David Rich, I see. I'll ask you to unmute and you can go ahead.
Well, I don't really have a question, but I will just say, since it's been quiet so far in the beginning of this interactive part, just that I am now curious to read these writings because I'm just feeling something positive about the attitude of looking that these writers bring to their encounters with these photographs. You know, that there is plenty of room for looking and seeing, and links up with the comment about stillness, not just moving images, but the stillness that allows us to also be with our own train of thought and engaging in that relationship between writing and images. There was even a mention of music, and that idea that it leaves room for the viewer. It puts the viewer a little bit on the spot, and it is not a one-way street. It is a relational, horizontal, non-hierarchical relational engagement with the process of seeing and being with the work that we are encountering. And I just find that attitude inspirational and inviting, and I look forward to reading more about these responses in more specific depth. Thank you.
Thank you. If anybody wants to respond to that, feel free. Otherwise, we had a question in the chat for Kenny: why black and white photographs rather than color?
Okay, thank you. It was originally taken in, it wasn't black and white originally when I took it, but for this work, when I wanted to submit this, I remember thinking about it, black and white or colored, and I wanted it stripped of distractions. I wanted it stripped of everything else, all the colors around, the grasses, I just wanted it stripped of everything. I wanted the reader or everybody who sees the photograph to just focus on the boy. So as I've thought about him, for years, for 5 years, I've often thought about him. I've often thought about the photograph, about the encounter. And so I was hoping that the essay and the photograph would also make the reader, not be distracted by whatever, every other thing around, and just focus on him, this boy standing on this hill, on the altar and holding this bell. And yeah, that was it really. I wanted the focus to be on him and nothing else.
Thank you. I think my colleague Chloe would like to ask a question. So Chloe, you can go ahead.
Well, first, I just want to thank you all for this incredibly brilliant and illuminating conversation. It's been such a pleasure to hear you all speak to your contributions. I was wondering if you could speak to, if at all, how your contribution maybe changed the way you relate to archival photographs or archives, and how you think about photography in general as a practice.
I should, can I just say something very quickly? I should frame their responses, if I have the audacity to, by saying that when I asked everyone to contribute, when I sent the email, I sent a link to the re-entanglements project, which had, the Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology, the archives of those museums, and I think one other archive, and just as a prompt, and it was pleasantly surprising to see that up to, I think, 4 of the contributors decided to write on archival images. I think, that there is a lot of engagement with the archives, because we can't, as Nigerians, escape, in a sense, or we are trying to escape, that's a better way of phrasing it, what we have been named. And so, archival responses just become almost like a necessary practice for many writers I know. And so it was good that in this particular exercise, a good number of the writers did that from my own view as the editor. Yeah. I should, since no one is speaking yet, Yinka and Immaculata and Joshua, Segun-Lean, who I think might be in the audience now, and then someone else. There were 4 people who responded with archival images. I mean, you can speak to it. One of the, I think, the person who bridged those 2 forms of responses, so to speak, was Yemisi Aribisala, who responded with a photograph from the family archive, which is also, you could say, at this point, a national treasure, because as she was saying, there are 2 figures whose lives and, whose life, for one of them who is still alive and dead, still means so much to the Nigerian project, so to speak. So you have someone like Olusegun Obasanjo, who is the stocky man, as she describes him at the back, and who has been president twice. He's, well, the first person who became president twice. The current president, this is his 2nd time being president. And then there were rumors that he wanted to be president, for a 3rd time. And then Bola Ige, who was Attorney General, actually, when he was murdered or assassinated in his home. And so these 2 figures, even though this photograph is in the family archive, the photograph, in a sense, could also be looked at as a historical photograph. And I was very pleased to see, which is one of the reasons why her piece starts the section, to use that as a sort of primer in bridging these 2 forms of responses to both photographs from the personal collection, so to speak, and that from a historical archive. So I implore Immaculata or Yinka or Joshua, if he's here, to speak about why the archive was particularly important to them. Yeah.
So I'll just say that I think that my relationship with the archive has always been one of considering what is the work of time in general, and because time is like this loop that continues to go regardless of whoever is alive, and to consider it from, which is what the very first paragraph does, really, to consider it from the point of view of physics. And it's like the laws of physics are they have no emotions. It's simply that this is what it is. If you throw something up, as far as the force of gravity exists, it's always going to come down, right? And to put that side by side with the work of the camera, which is a mechanical, equipment whose primary job is simply to record. And when you record, you're creating history. And so I was sort of looking at these things in relation to each other, and then started to think, okay, what happens when a human being is introduced into the process of creating an archive? When you introduce human beings, you introduce intention, and so that starts to become the question: what is the intention of the archive, or the intention with which a certain kind of history is created? So I think these are currently my own entry points into the idea of the archive, and it's with like these sentiments that I approach the archive, and that's really my own sort of like form of engagement with the archive as of now. Yeah.
I wanted to respond because I also found a lot of resonance with what you were saying, Yinka, about like the consideration of time. Because while we think about archives traditionally as something from the past, which I think for the sake of framing language and having like a clarity of what the word represents, like it's easier to just say an archive is a collection or documentation of things from the past. But one of the things that I was specifically thinking about, and one of the reasons why I decided not to write from historical archives, archive in quote, was what you said, Yinka, about time, and the photograph that I chose specifically in thinking about the fact that yes, it was taken maybe in 2019 or 2020, but it is also going to one day become a sort of archive, and that's the reason why I was thinking more about writing around a contemporary archive. And the thing that you say with intention was what I was also thinking about, like with the gaze. And I think in a lot of archival study, yes, we have had the benefit of looking through the archives with like a post-colonial way of thinking. But there is also something I think about the model of relation that has produced the archive that we now have to like reframe or write new narratives around, or even speculate around in the legacy and work of Saidiya Hartman. But one of the things that I was also thinking about with my piece is thinking about like the model of creating archives, how we are seeing, how we are relating to a subject, let me put that in quotes, what that gaze is intended for, what that relationship is like, and how even all of that figure into the image that is eventually produced, what is eventually documented.
Can I attempt something to talk about the pointlessness of time? It's not what I chose to write about. I chose a contemporary photograph. In the recent class, I'm at the University of East Anglia, and the course about it's on Arts of Africa, Oceania, and Americas. Someone came in, the PhD student came in to give a talk recently, drawing from archival photographs of Congolese, the Luba people from Congo, and they have this tradition of body markings, cicatrices on their bodies. And the talk focused more about the quote unquote European perception of these body markings at the time they were taken. No progress seems to be made and this is only in relation to specific occasions. It's not general. No progress seems to have been made in this person's approach or thinking about Congolese people or that tribe, because it was all archival photographs did for this person, in my view, was to freeze these people and freeze their thinking and freeze the hand knowledge of these people and not much else. So it's almost as if it validated someone else's bias, or not bias, or just insufficient knowledge. Because if you do what you want with the archive, the time, people still have to act, and time itself will not resolve anything. It almost seemed pointless. 100 years could have passed, and these archival photographs might not have meant much to this person. If I have a push there on an argument is not to give time too much credit and to still put the responsibility on people that utilizes these archives. One clear example is that on Congolese women from Luba, they do body markings. And if you're not initiated into this tribe, or you wouldn't know that a simple spiral could mean a saying. In one case, this was an Indegisi, not Luba, another part of Congo. A spiral, simple spiral of a cicatrix meant or suggested a saying that goes, this is from Mary Noether's writing. Mary Noether is an American woman who initiated with anthropologists. Suggested the phrase, the cicatrix suggested the phrase, all that comes from the chief returns to the chief. Now, if you're not initiated, if you don't know this, you wouldn't possibly know. But all the person had was just photograph from the archives without any contextual knowledge. So I think I want to make a little push for maybe it's not the pointlessness of time, but that the responsibility is still on people who utilize these archives to simply make good use of it. Make sense?
Thank you so much for all of those responses. That was amazing. Thank you. I really appreciate those.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Chloe. I'll pass it over now to our managing editor, Charlie, for a question.
Thank you, Eleanor. Thanks, Emmanuel. Thanks, everyone. It's been an incredibly stimulating conversation. I learned so much working on this critics page. And of course, Emmanuel, as a fellow student of David Levi Strauss, I was very happy to see Levi's prompt leading to your prompt. I feel there's a legacy here that is worth noting. One of the things that I really liked in the introduction that you gave, in addition to talking about this balance, was the heart of photography. The image and an idea that I really liked, and I liked how you made a point of saying that so many different approaches were taken to so many different types of images, and yet each contributor uncovered the heart of photography. And I was really curious to ask you if you thought of the heart of photography as a singular thing, viewable in many different angles, maybe like a multi-cut prism or something like this, or is the multiplicity greater, that there are many hearts as there are many truths? Yeah, I just kind of wanted to leave it like that for you.
Thank you. The first thing to say that in 2016, David Levi Strauss, who was our teacher, at the now sadly defunct program at SVA, invited a bunch of us to write in response to the prompt, which was, what is criticism now? And my speculation at the time, I'm not sure if I'll write it exactly the same way, but my speculation at the time was that I was thinking about the Nigerian vernacular. Much of that thinking remains the same for me, in the sense that I'm constraining my thinking, so to speak, to in a particular way to think through what it means to be Nigerian, what it means for Nigerians to be in the world, in claiming the number of diasporas that we are claiming, and also what it means to think through the images that have been produced of Nigerian life or alongside Nigerian life. And so in that sense, extending the invitation to, writers that I admired, I've worked with in some cases, and some I was actually emailing for the first time, was to, in a sense, expand that thinking a little further. To think about a photograph, now to go to your second point, to think about a photograph. Of course, my framing was I was being audacious, right? To think about photography, the heart of photography, uncovering the heart of photography. But it was a proposition, right? That from any vantage point, what is the heart of photography, right? This is the question that I was hoping that if each writer would respond to in their own way. If you were going to define narrative, are you going to define narrative as a short story, as fiction? As Sabo said, a number of people are failed novelists, but what does it mean for a novelist to write criticism? What does it mean for a writer like Yinka to write a novel based on a painting and to keep writing it? It's in his bio. I wonder when he's going to finish that. That's it. But I'm looking forward to reading that novel because for me, that would, in some sense, also embody what it means for narratives to respond to visual art. And so I did not, I'm not even thinking about the relativism of meaning when I speak about photography in that way. I'm simply thinking about the relativism of each contributor's, each writer's approach to photography. And that can differ in, in as many ways as we can define writing styles. Finally, when the last semester that I taught, just an incredible honor to have taught at SVA, right after I finished, or a year after I finished, from 2016 to 2019, the final class that I did teach was called Narrative as Criticism. And this was my once in a lifetime, well, not once in a lifetime, but once an opportune moment, so to speak, to reflect or to organize thinking around what criticism can be when it is placed alongside narrative. And I remember that one of the real struggles that I faced was that I feel like I was trying to imagine a genre, right? That either existed or that I was trying to conjure into existence. But at this point, I think that, I'm not interested in any form of genre making as much as I'm interested in the fact that writing can perform specific, or various forms of writing can perform specific functions, right? And the function in this particular instance was how to respond to photographs when one is given absolutely no constraints imaginatively. And of course, as I said, I was willing to bet that this prompt was fail-proof in the sense that there was really no failure possible, right? I know that the Rail wasn't going to do structural edits, for instance. I know that these writers are competent. They can write very good sentences, beautiful sentences. They are thinkers that I knew. So I wasn't looking for a particular voice or a particular style. What I was looking for was, each person's relative approach to photography.
Thank you, Charlie, for that great question. Thank you, Emmanuel. That was really beautiful. I want to turn it back to our speakers to see if any of you have questions for each other and allow some time for that.
I'd like to ask Yinka a question. It's a question that came to my mind the first time as a flash, and I've not quite had the time to formulate into a very lucid, into a lucid direction, but I think I would ask it. I think you will get me. So Yinka, your piece, I think, is the only piece where you have like a kind of vignette kind of structure, like 1, 2, and some of them are just a paragraph long. In fact, there was one that was just a sentence long. And that kind of fractured the narrative or your thinking? I don't know. So why did you opt for that kind of approach, that kind of fractured mosaic kind of layering or telling? Sorry, that kind of mosaic or staccato kind of telling. Why did you go for that? Why didn't, as opposed to something more fluid, you know? It was just, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think that I was really looking at this image for a long time, and it's an image that is not. It's surrounded by both clear and unclear circumstances, right? In the sense that it's clear that there's a war going on. You know, it's clear that there's displacement that has happened. It's clear that, you know, there's violence. There are certain things that are surrounding the eventual, let me say, certain things that lead up to the creation of this photograph. You know, those things are clear. But some of the things that are unclear are, for example, how this person who has been photographing in Nigeria comes to Bioko to continue to photograph, because there's still the war ongoing in Nigeria, right? And so I'm wondering, what is the impulse for leaving all of that behind and coming here? How come he's able to photograph the very first set of people who are landing in, because that image is actually the first set of Biafrans who land in Bioko from Nigeria. It's the very first set. So he basically must have been following to know that this was going to happen. And so he was also following, you know, the refugees to sort of come to this place. And in the beginning, when I was thinking about that, what I was thinking about was, is this a calculated image or is it a formulated image? It's a sort of like very small line, in the sense that if the photographer is simply recording what's going on, then he's just going around with his camera, he sees anything, he photographs it. There's nothing personal, you know. But I imagine that as a human being who's been working in this place, after a while, he starts to develop, you know, certain kinds of like sentiments, certain biases, you know. It's just natural, you know, there's two people fighting. If you continue to watch, after a while, you decide to start to support someone to win. You know, it's like, if I could like make an example of, for example, you're watching a football match, you don't know who the who the two players are or the two teams are. But after a while, you realize you're suddenly rooting for someone, you know. And I was wondering if there was that impulse. And so there was that speculation on my own part as to whether he had someone that he was supporting, right? And so when I was looking at this image, I was thinking, this is an image that is formulated out due to the wishes of the photographer. Not a calculated image in the sense of, I want to tell a story, or I'm trying to frame propaganda in that, you know, in the way that a photographer might take a photograph from a certain angle because it's trying to create some kind of propaganda. But it's a formulated image in the sense of personal or private wish, you know, and it's a very small line in that sense. And so because of like all of these speculations, all of these unknowns that surrounded the image, I didn't want to write in a way that was like so assured, you know, of what was going on. I wanted to just say, today when I wake up, I look at this photograph, this is what I think. I come tomorrow, I look at this photograph, this is what I think, you know. And then I wanted to try to see if there could be a way to sort of like, even when you go in a zigzag, end up at a spot that sort of makes some kind of sense, you know. And so that's really the reason for that structure.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
I should add that one of perhaps the Biafran War is the event that is the most photographed of Nigerian events by foreigners. And so there are archives in all kinds of places, from the French to you know, to the British, to the Italians, to, you know, almost every conceivable European power at the time. And so one of the things that I had never seen, that I didn't realize that the ICRC had an archive of the Biafran photographs, but Yinka's choice of that photograph and writing around it was very intriguing for me. And I think it consolidated my fantasy projects, you know, to sort of gather all the foreign photographs of Biafra in one place. But what shape that project will take is yet to be hashed out. So I solicit your suggestions. Thank you.
I've actually been thinking about, I mean, I don't have suggestions for you, something different entirely about speaking of archives and private archives and public archive, and how we engage with you know, public work in general. But as writers or artists or photographers, artists in general, I've been thinking about the role of artists in their own family as well as historians, as the collector of archives. I mean, I can imagine, Emmanuel, when you were working on your book, I'm Still With You, which is coming out soon, the memoir, and also in engaging the Civil War as well. How I'm just thinking about the role of the artists in general in their family, and also how the work can engage, how they can engage that work beyond their own family as well, beyond their immediate family, and sort of serve as a broader conversation for other things. I feel like we are talking about your work here, but generally, I mean, since we're talking about archives, what role do you think writers or artists have in their family in engaging their, you know, in their own private history, which is, I mean, Yemisi's work, Immaculata's work as well. I like the fact that she was able to write about herself, about her grandfather, even though she was considering this public photograph. So yes, what role in bringing context to public photographs and all of that, what role do you think writers and artists have in that intersection?
Yeah, I mean, my working theory, if the question was for me, or at least to start, my working theory is always that a person's individual life is not interesting until there is a larger story that it can sort of be walked into or alongside. And so I would have been very surprised if 5 years ago you told me I would have written about the Nigerian Civil War, you know, in the direct way in which I have. And my thinking about it only became, I guess, productive or necessary when I began to think about my uncle, who I was named after, you know, and that was also connected to a different, you know, a more recent grief or process of mourning. And so that's the first sense, right? For me, you know, and I think Yemisi does this very brilliantly, where she's not simply speaking about the fact that her grandparents convened this august, as we say in Nigeria, august gathering of, you know, eminent people, but also what it means to be, what lateness or time actually, what it means for time to be encoded into a photograph, what it means, what lateness is, and all of that. And so the question for me is that a person's life, a family story is, for me, you know, utterly uninteresting until it connects to something, you know, in a sense, more, how can you find in a grain of sand the universal, you know, that very famous, you know, way of speaking about it, you know. So I would say that there's that, you know, the family archive is first and foremost the family archive, to be very clear in my own thinking. The photographs taken of my parents or my parents took of me or whatever are first and foremost for my family. And so if I'm going to share it with the world, it's better be worth something, you know, that can connect to the lives of others. Or this is my working assumption always. Yeah.
Well, I think this is a great moment to turn to our poetry reading. Thank you so much for these really generous contributions. I'll definitely be thinking about this conversation all day. But now it is my immense pleasure to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Megan Sungyoon, to the stage. Megan Sungyoon translates between languages and across genres. Recently selected as a runner-up for Center for Book Arts Chaplet Contest, Sungyoon has works published or forthcoming in, among others, World Poetry Review, Copper Nickel, and Columbia Journal, where Sungyoon served as the translation editor. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Megan, and I'm excited to hear your poetry.
All right. Thank you, Brooklyn Rail, for inviting me to read at this wonderful event. I'm very grateful for the space and conversation happened in it. My first poem is entitled Morning. Morning is dying. Call. What is poetry when you die outside of it? You leave tomorrow by never arriving. Leave tomorrow. Leave morning. In translation, your dying is immediate. When I hear conditional, predicative, how dying is in home language. Saju says I was born a setting sun. Who I wanted to become died a decade before the day I was born. So often being born is an excuse for a living, as my unborn sibling is for the proximity between birth and death. Mother's dad's sibling is to mother's mother an already. Tense is elusive, for setting sun is too fortunate a metaphor. Mother said the water surrounding Vancouver Island sparkled in emerald blue. I arrive in a vacuum cylinder. The accent is so cute, it clings to the memory. The altar girl remains genuflect as I hit her chest thrice. Culpa, where is mother? You left her. See how ethereal her tongue. Dead end. When one means both end, how is a dead end in between two roads? Separation, serpentiform, split tongue. Speak in dichotomy. One, to make a choice. Zero. You are always plural. Two funerals. Home. Nobody jaywalks in front of the funeral home. Other deaths. Repeat the deceased appearing. Clear. Static. Stasis. Crematorium. Nobody jaywalks in front of the funeral home. Overlap. Other deaths. Rupture. Overture. Repeat the deceased appearing. Clear. Static. Stasis. Size. Not my mother. Not anyone's mother. Mother. This is everything you wanted. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Megan. That was lovely. And thank you so much again to Immaculata, Kita, Yemisi, Yinka, Kemi, Sebo, Joseph, and Emmanuel. And thank you to Joshua, who wasn't able to join us today, but I know he helped with the preparation. We would also like to thank the Terra Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program and for supporting our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. For the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has provided a platform for arts, culture, and politics. So please check the chat for a link to donate to support our writers, editors, and operations to keep everything going here at the Rail. And join us at 1 p.m. tomorrow for a conversation with Nikki Nojumi on the event 1981 at Helena and Rather. We conclude with a poetry reading by Natasha Rao. Thank you so much again to our speakers. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. And it's now, as Rail tradition, time to open the mics and say hello and goodbye as you. Thanks.
Wow.
Everyone.
Thank you
Thank
so
you very much.
Thanks, Megan. Great reading.
Thank you.
So great. Thank you.
Emmanuel, Yinka,
Thank you.
Sebo, Joseph, thank you so much.
That
Kemi,
was
thank you.
amazing.